Well, hello and thank you for joining me for another ITY and Alex on Tech video. I'm here today with Chris Kline. He's the VP of DevOps Strategy at CA Technologies. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So I thought I'd just start at the beginning and ask you to give us a bit of a quick overview at your role at CA.
So I look after our DevOps strategy, which probably can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. To us, it means connecting together a bunch of disparate parts of the business. We have a bunch of lofty promises, the marketing, that's talking about a modern software factory and digital transformation, and these are important things to get your hands around. And then we have products that we sell. How do we connect the products to that messaging, and how do we provide practical outcomes that make the promises of DevOps more real? I think there's a lot of promises that are out there. We're probably about 10 years in on that now, and there seems to be a lot of gaps between the outcomes and how do I get there? How do I make this thing tactically relevant to me and something that I could go and do this afternoon and feel like I'm making progress on? So my job is to really figure out those tactical advantages.
So what brings you to Australia? And is it your first trip
I don't
here?
think it's the summer weather. I come every year. We come to visit customers. We do sales enablement. There's trade shows involved with really trying to make sure that we can connect our mothership to all parts of the world. So I'm on the road most of the year.
Sure, and you're meeting with government next week in Canberra as
That's
well. Yeah, which is my hometown. So how should Australian businesses be thinking about IT monitoring and analytics?
There is a dramatic shift that is afoot right now. And
Dun, dun, dun.
dun, dun, dun. One of the best ways I can describe that with a serious background music is that the density of the data that represents the monitoring estate is dramatically improving or increasing. Let me give you an example. So you've got Docker microservices shifts to cloud, where once an application would have had, make up a number, a handful of metrics. Let's just say it was 100 metrics that they would use to monitor the KPIs of an application. Now, because the makeup of that application is shifting, there's not one or two components. Now there's hundreds of components that each have their own sets of metrics that handle the monitoring.
And there's also all the APIs to all the other tools
Everything.
and everything.
And
yes.
so the density of that stuff is logarithmically increasing. And so what it means is that you no longer can depend on hiring a smart enough guy who can go out and just look at this list of metrics and say, oh, this is what you need to look at. This is your problem. I don't know if you're familiar with the book, The Phoenix Project.
No, what's the short version?
Okay, so it's one of my favorite books, and I would highly recommend it for anybody's reading list. It's about maybe 4 or 5 years old now. But I consider it to be kind of the de facto standard in understanding what DevOps is all about. The book is written by Gene Kim and some co-authors, and it is formulated as a story that represents a day in the life of a company that's trying to transform. And the transformation is not going so well. They're way over budget, they're way over deadline, it's an auto parts manufacturing company, and they're having trouble shipping products, and it's just all of the nastiness that we live in the lives of real customers. And the book then goes through the protagonist's point of view of trying to figure out what's wrong and then trying to get a handle on it and ultimately trying to fix it. And so it's a story about how DevOps can change a broken business into one that is functioning more normally, but it's doing it through storytelling in a way that's really interesting to understand. In that book, there's a character, and the character's name is Brent. Brent is, he's my favorite one to talk about because all of you have Brent inside your shop. Brent is the expert. Brent's job is to fix everything because he knows more than anybody else. He's the guy that knows networking, and he knows storage, and he's the guy that knows more about cloud than anybody else. And he's the database fixer. He's the guy that's just magic. And as you run through this book, we start to realize that while Brent is magic, Brent is also the problem. Because Brent is the focus of all bottlenecks. As he's working on unplanned work over here, he's not getting work done over there, and everybody is waiting for him to go and fix their problem for them. The reason that I mention this is not the Brent problem of unplanned work is something perhaps worth a larger conversation, but as we think about how the monitoring landscape is changing, we no longer have enough experts to go out and read the data and figure out what to do. We can't rely on tribal knowledge alone. And so how do we bottle up those capabilities in a way that we can now give them to more people that represents that outcome, but without requiring that level of understanding? That's the transformation we're going through right now.
So, well, it's a very interesting story, and I'm going to
read the book.
Yeah, check it out.
I don't get any credit for that. You're welcome, Jinkyo.
So one of the things that you're here to also talk about is AIOps. Now we know, DevOps, we've heard of DevSecOps, which CA is meant to have coined the term, but now AIOps. And you can sort of guess from the terminology, but let's hear it from you.
So we have these people whose job is to come up with terms. And when they come up with terms and they get us to use the terms, they get bonuses.
Yeah.
So we're really helping them get more bonuses. Now, it's kind of funny.
We need DevSec AIOps.
Oh my goodness.
A quartet.
I've got family that are in the business and those who are outside, and there's kind of this laugh about the language that we use.
Yeah.
We speak in a way that the rest of normal people, they don't understand.
Acronym land.
We use acronyms to make ourselves sound like we're smarter than perhaps we
actually
VIPs,
right?
So AIOps, yeah, it's buzzword bingo. It is a new flavor of the week, I suppose.
And with AI getting ever smarter, although not at Skynet levels yet, I mean, it's relevant.
It's creeping up on us.
Yeah.
So to be fair, I think the terminology is perhaps a little bit ahead of the capabilities in the market.
It's not singularity ops just yet.
It is. It truly isn't, and I don't think the T2000 IT ops fixer has come online just yet. But there is a shift in this density of data that I'm talking about. If it's no longer acceptable to require people to go out and look at all of the data, then we need a better way, which is to apply analytics, there's another buzzword, to sift through the data and help me figure out what I should be looking at.
I mean, AI could be analytics intelligence because it's all related.
Analytics intelligence, artificial intelligence, it really can be several different things. What it ultimately means is outcomes from data. In the past, the monitoring vendors, all of them, would give themselves, and I include us in this as well, we would give ourselves credit because we merely gave you a tool that would surface a bunch of data. And then we would say, have a nice day, our job is done here. And in the eye of an expert, you could figure out all kinds of magical things. The shift now is to embed more of the magic in the tool rather than requiring that to be in the eye of the beholder.
Well, otherwise it's information overload. I mean, you want the...
Absolutely.
I remember when we had internet security software popping up every 5 seconds telling you, asking you permission for things. And it's like, well, just deal with it automatically. I don't need to be asked if I want to authorize this firewall rule or whatever. And obviously that's at a small scale, but now this is happening at a much larger scale.
And that's where it's going. So as we become more deterministic in the relationships, in the context, in the correlation, we can be more deterministic in outcomes. So let's use an example. I don't need to get permission to go and restart a server or add capacity. When we know that's the right thing to do, just go do it.
Just be dynamic about it and allocate it.
Every year, we host a group of our customer leaders at a variety of different conferences, and we ask the same question each year. We ask how many of you would be willing to turn over and allow the tool to actually take action based upon whatever thing has been analyzed. When we first started asking that question 4 or 5 years ago, 0 hands went up. They wanted to be notified about it, but they wanted the opportunity to make that decision themselves. And as we went forward, beginning about 2 years ago, we had about a quarter of the hands that magically started going up. It was a dramatic shift. This year, it was about half the hands that went up. There's a mental shift now amongst the practitioners and leaders in our business where they're embracing and willing, under the right conditions, to have automatic remediation be taking place when we know deterministically that that is the correct thing to do.
I was at a Thales conference. They're a huge defense logistics space contractor from France, and I was at a conference there earlier this year. And one of the things they were talking about was cybersecurity and defense, but they were talking about the concept of explainable AI, where the AI that makes a decision needs to be able to come and explain to you later on exactly the steps it took and why it took those steps.
Yes.
And that would, of course, then give you a lot more confidence in the ability of AI to make those decisions. And if it made the wrong decision, you would know why, and you could remediate that and fix it so that in the future it didn't make those sort of wrong decisions.
And what you're describing is the essence of machine learning, which we sometimes glance over. It's that it won't be right all the time. And is there some way you can close the loop to tell the thing when it was wrong and to reinforce when it was right? And this is a principle of evidence. And it's not always a closed loop where the system's going to go do the things by itself. Sometimes it's just presenting enough contextual data that comes from disparate sources, and ultimately the decision might still be made by the operator. Sure. That can also be a form of AIOps as well.
Well, you haven't had to sift through dozens and dozens of
That's the thing.
things. You've
so
just got
in
a
the
couple
past, we would swivel chair our way to a solution by using the tool for network, the tool for systems, the tool for applications, the tool for logs, and we might love all of those tools, but we would alt-tab our way across all of those and have many different screens that we would look at, and then the operator's job would be to correlate those things all together. What you see happening now is that we're starting to now coalesce all of those into unified data stores that give us a fighting chance at figuring out where the correlation is amongst those different tools, even though it's disparate data.
Now I've got some more questions here about AIOps, which you may have already sort of partially answered, but let's just go with it. So what do businesses need to consider in relation to, you know, implementing this AI into their ops? And obviously you'll say, well, we've got software and technology that can help you with that.
We do, but there's principles behind that.
Yeah.
So the first principle, what got you here won't get you there. The way that all of this data has been managed in the past is hierarchically. So in the past, you would start with, it doesn't matter what the tool is, there would be some widget in the tool that would show metrics, and those metrics would show up in a tree, and that tree has a root. The top of that tree says host name, and under that host name is metric A and B and C, and they could be organized in a variety of different ways, but they're organized by host names, and we would know as practitioners that server 1 and 2 and 3 were a part of the ABC application. And when the pager would go off and the notification would come in, whatever it happens to, what form it takes, I just know when I see that and I see server 1, oh, I know that the ABC application has a problem. Well, that's different now today. As we move into microservices, cloud environments, the ephemeral nature of these components is that they're shifting around all the time. No longer can I depend upon a hierarchical tree where I just know that server 1 is the thing that is my baby. My baby's name might be changing multiple times a day, and my baby might be hacked into you know, a variety of components.
Internally or externally.
And so we cannot use the same tooling that got us here effectively as we move forward. So you need a system that is more of a polyglot kind of a thing, that doesn't have just one shape to it, that isn't a strongly typed architecture.
Because that's not life. It's not black and white. It's all these shades of grey.
And you might want today to organize things because you're looking at them by containers, but tomorrow you may wish to look at them by service types or, I don't know, anything else. And you need the systems to be flexible enough that you can pivot them and look at them on any angle, not one that the vendor has forced upon you. That's step one. The second one then is to provide the right kind of grouping and filtering, smart filtering, so that you're not looking at just raw data. If I have 100 containers that are doing the same thing, I don't really want to look at all those metrics. What I want to know is, what should I look at, and what is the summary of those things at a layer that's above, that's an abstraction? In a way you can think of it, it's sort of calculus. Instead of now just looking at all of the details, now we're actually looking at the next layer removed from that. It's the area under the curve, I suppose, if you want to think about it that way. But I'm looking at a slope, and I'm trying to look at the change of that thing. Is this thing increasing severely or a little bit? And its value at any given point in time may not be interesting, but the shape overall of that behavior is interesting, and that's what's represented in the analytics.
Yeah, it's just like getting the bird's eye view. You know, when you're on the ground, looking around at all the activity around you,
exactly.
You miss that high view.
Yeah, it's trees and forests. We have good analogies for it. We just haven't solved it very well.
And we haven't had the technology to give us that view until now.
That's very
we've
true.
had parts of it, but that's matured. And you know, I guess some people just still don't realize that this technology exists, and all they need to do is implement it, and suddenly they have so much more useful information at their fingertips. Which leads on to the next question. And you know, in addition to everything that you've already said about, you know, helping you data mine that information so much more effectively, and only be surfaced the things that are really relevant for individuals to take immediate action on, or whatever the decision process is. You know, what other new opportunities is AIOps creating, especially in today's application economy?
There's a huge problem with alert fatigue, is one term that's being used.
I was at a recent conference, and they said if everything's critical, nothing's critical.
Exactly.
You know?
How red is red is one way that we like to describe this. It doesn't matter what your favorite monitoring tool or metric set is. This is as true in network as it is in user experience. Anywhere along that spectrum, you have things that go bump. And when they go bump, how bad is it? There's a couple of things that are affecting that. One is correlation. This is a really important word as we figure out how to solve this problem. Correlation means tie the things, build a body. And in that body, when something smacks on my knee, figure out what shoulders are connected to that knee. In the past, we did this purely with math. And frankly, the math doesn't always work. Sometimes the math will construct a body that has 6 heads, 18 shoulders, and 2 knees on it, and it will say that because this knee got bumped, that head over there hurts. And you look at the model and you think, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. It is physically impossible that surface over there was hurt by this problem. Correlation removes that. Correlation says, build the skeleton. Tell me that knee bones connect to leg bones. tell me that the shoulder is indirectly connected, but in between it there's a torso. Therefore, when there's a problem in the knee, I can trace that thing back, not just using time-based correlation, but a causal correlation that says, I know whose user experience. In my example, let's say the shoulder is a user experience. Yeah. And a high CPU or a full disk or a network problem that went bump, if I can tie that back causally, now I can give you true root cause analysis. What that's doing for us is now we can get away from having to overanalyze and look at every alert every time, which is this alert fatigue. How red is red? The CPU is 100%. Oh, we should go tell somebody. It's been that way for a long time. It might be causing a problem, or it might not. If we tie it back to a user, then we say, I don't care about those things unless it's a user experience up here. That was the effect of it, the outcome of it. So now we're using user experience as the bellwether that determines where we should be spending our time, and that's a much better way of triaging our time as experts. And then we drill down ultimately to all of the component systems. And yes, it can be storage or a CPU or whatever, doesn't really matter. But if I tied it back to the thing on the top, now I'm making better decisions. And that now, this is where the machine learning comes in, I can filter out a lot of the noise that is represented in too many alarms. I get downstream suppression is one example. So when my knee hurts, sometimes my leg also has problems. I don't need 7 alerts, one for each toe and for my shin and for my knee. No, I can just say there's a leg problem, put a higher priority on that, and then suppress everything that's associated with that, relating now back to the user experience that might be my shoulder. That now gives an operator a fighting chance because there's one alert where there would have been 10, 20 or more, but more importantly, it's tied back to something that represents a business outcome. Remember, in the past, we have spent way too much time on, I'm going to say this perhaps somewhat offensively, but things that don't matter.
Yeah. Well, in my mind, I'm thinking that there's different alerts for different people. If that CPU is going to be a problem down the line, then the most important person doesn't have to be alerted about that. Somebody else within that IT team can be alerted
do something
at the appropriate time, whether it's now, tomorrow, next week, next month. But it'll be on that list of things to be done, and you can more effectively allocate resources.
We spend time running around. I remember a company I was working at years ago, and every time there was a problem, they would call everybody to all fires.
An all hands meeting.
All hands on deck.
Not
right.
necessary.
And everybody had to go and figure out whose fault it was.
Yeah.
And they had a post-mortem thing that they did as well when it was a high-level problem, and there was basically a blame that was being cast.
Yeah.
And so during this problem, I kid you not, what would happen is we'd all be trying to find the log file or the tool that would prove it's not my fault.
Yeah.
So I can get off the phone, and so the hot potato wouldn't land in my lap later on.
Yeah.
That was teaching really poor behavior. It doesn't matter if the CPU is high if it's not directly related to some kind of customer outcome.
Yeah.
And when we get a handle on that, now we're starting to use people's time for higher order activities that are far more meaningful. So one of the outcomes of AIOps is you spend less time working on stuff that sucks, stuff that's not fun, stuff that's a waste of time, stuff that doesn't get you any credit in your career. You spend more time working on the things that relate to business outcomes, and this helps us shift from a cost-centered mentality, which is keeping the lights on, to a profit-centered mentality, which is helping our colleagues in the business to make strategic decisions that define us against competition.
Absolutely. Well, instead of covering your backside, you're focusing on making a profit and making the business run more smoothly. It's completely different.
That's fundamentally different.
Thought process.
There was times in my career where I would get paged in the middle of the night to go fix a problem, and I had no idea whatsoever how the widget I was responsible for fit into the business. They all had 3-letter acronyms on them. And really what we're talking about now is connecting that whole body together in a way that everybody should understand why their work is important. How did you contribute to the bottom line and the outcomes of that business? And I think that raises the tide for all boats.
Absolutely. So which markets or sectors are leading the way in integrating AI into IT ops?
In my opinion, it's not really a sector or market that is more appropriate than another. There are some industries that are being challenged by regulation and so on to change more quickly perhaps than others. For example, in Europe, there's open banking laws that have taken effect this year. And those laws now are requiring the big stalwart banks to effectively open up their doors and allow little tiny guys to play along with them. That is requiring now a ton of changes that before you could do because you wanted to, but probably you didn't want to, so you didn't push your way down that path. Now these changes are coming much, much more quickly. And so it's maybe not an industry itself that is an AIOps industry, but it's as a result of market influences. Now they're moving more aggressively, let's say, into mobile or into cloud microservices, these things that increase that data density that we started with. Anybody who has a density of data is the candidate for this kind of technology. The technology is evolving rapidly. It's not a panacea, but the entire goal is anybody, whether you are the biggest enterprise that has fleets of Brents, when we're talking about the expert in the Phoenix project, or a little mom and pop shop who has no Brents, they both benefit equally. One is that you're trying to release a bottleneck, and the other is that my bottleneck is because I don't have any experts. It's it's different sides of the same problem. You're seeking a tool that focuses you on insights that lead to outcomes, rather than just showing you descriptive data.
So for those who are hearing about this for the first time, or they've heard about it, or they know that they've got these bottlenecks or not enough brands, I mean, what is just a few bits of advice they should take heed from you to get started in this area?
You're only as good as the source data that you have. You cannot create an effective analysis tool where you have inferior data that is feeding it. As you think about how the problem gets solved fundamentally, the first layer is to bring together data from disparate sources. But that data still has to come from reliable sources. So you do need to get a handle on, how do I do a good job monitoring my network? Do I have adequate systems monitoring? Do I understand what's happening inside my applications, and can I tie those things to user experience? Even if they're separate tools, those are 4 areas that you need to have good monitoring in. So network, system, application, and user experience. Once you merely get that data together in a common platform, and there are multiple vendors now that are doing this, that alone does not solve your problem. Getting the data together has been a tricky solution, one that vendors have promised for over a decade and only recently are delivering on. But merely co-locating data and saying, here it is on a dashboard, have a nice day, doesn't solve the problem we're describing here. The next step then is to work towards insights. I think the outcome here is going to be to tie everything back to user experience. If you're only working at lower layers of the stack, it's really hard to have that influence to the business, remember the profit center conversation, unless we can speak the language that they understand. And that language is the end customer and the financial implications of decisions. For example, you're migrating to cloud. You want to see that the thing that you move to cloud, A, costs less, and B, has the same or better quality of service than it had before. That's an obvious one. So the AIOps in that situation is going to be to validate the actual performance of the application, but then to tie that back to specific outcomes representing user experiences and ultimately revenue to the business.
For businesses that are watching this interview and having these disparate companies offering various parts of their solution to help them manage all this data, I mean, does your technology work with these other different vendors to then give people this overarching view, the AI on top of the dashboard, or
we only like our own stuff. The world has changed, and no longer can you be the guy that only plays with your own toys.
You need to be interoperable.
Absolutely. And so the data platform that underlies all of this, we call our platform Jarvis. It's kind of a take from Iron Man. Yeah, exactly. And that platform is constructed using open source technologies, but also with open APIs, because we understand completely that it's highly unlikely that you're ever going to have our own badged stuff all the way up the stack. There's going to be data from other sources.
I mean, presumably, if people are using your technology and they think, wow, this works well, will you then say to them, hey, well, we actually have this that could help you, but we work with whatever.
You start with whatever, and there's always going to be ancillary data that comes from somewhere else. Even if they loved our stuff here, in the 4 areas that I mentioned, there's always going to be something else. For example, they're going to have system of record data that we never have access to. Let's say you're a telco. How many new lines of service were activated? What are the average rates those people are paying? Blah, blah, blah. Wouldn't that be nice to combine together with performance data so that now you can show how a migration to cloud is affecting new subscriber rates or churn rates, getting closer to marketing conversations than we have in the past? That data will never exist in something that has my logo on it. So what we're really talking about is opening the system up. We want to build a best of breed that you use our things as much as possible in that stack, but we're also going to play nice with others, recognizing first and foremost that some of the most influential data will come from your system of record that has nothing to do with a vendor.
Is there a customer you want to champion that's successfully using AIOps today?
It's still a really nascent space. It's really only come on scene over the course of the last year. Now, CA has been in this space for decades.
I mean, your customer you want to champion is you.
That's one good way of putting it. We have customers who have been focused for years on being the best at the network monitoring, the app monitoring, the infrastructure. We have a customer now, a large automaker, and if I told you where, you'd probably figure it all out. They are really leading the way at making sure that the correlation that we're doing in this model is correct, so that the evidence, where we were speaking earlier, is strong enough that they will trust the system to make the decisions. So it is an evolution. They have the software, they're using it today, but they're not going to turn the Skynet thing loose until they can trust that evidence. And so this is an evolutionary move that if we come back and have the conversation months later, you'll hear the next pages to the story, where you have to have the best data that's coming in, then you have to review and trust the evidence in the analysis that's happening, and finally, ultimately, you're going to tie that to outcomes that represent automation, so that you want the system not only to tell you that the thing broke, but it will take the action that you would have taken on its behalf, given the evidence, and you would nod your head yes, saying, yes, I would have done the very same thing. There's enough moving pieces there that there are customers in each space that are doing these things, and over the course of the next year or so, we're going to start seeing them all come together in one uniform whole.
Now, as we get towards the end of the interview, I have three sort of standard questions. And one is always about the future. I mean, you talked about how in the past, no executives put their hands up with the AI, and now half of them are putting it up. In a decade, how advanced is this AI going to be? I mean, it surely will have completely revolutionized the industry today as we know it.
A decade could be too long, because if you think where we were a decade ago, dramatic shifts. One of the first things I see happening is that monitoring and testing are on a collision course. And I don't think this is a decade. I think this is much less than that. We're talking 3 years, 5 years out, where the principles that describe testing, that is getting your code ready for production, are going to absolutely collide and unify with the same principles of watching the code after it goes to production. There are things, for example, such as a canary deployment that are out there today, where using CI and CD, continuous delivery kinds of techniques, you can push code out to a small portion of production servers and effectively test in production. Let's say you have 10 servers for your application, and you push new code out to only 2 of them, and you test a new feature, and you see how well that feature is being adopted and whether it's working and performing correctly. And if so, then you use automation to push it out to the rest of those machines. And if it doesn't work so well, kind of like the canary in the coal mine, then you tell everybody to get out, you pull that bad code back and put the old thing, having only ever affected a small portion.
So it's sort of seamless.
There's a huge amount of AIOps wrapped up in the concept of a canary deployment, but today canary deployments are really all about creating the CI/CD tool chain that enables getting that code out there quickly. The observability around that, how well is it performing? Are these new functions actually being used? Are they performant? That's an important one, but are they being used? Are customers embracing them in a way that is actually causing them to have a better quality user experience, and then using that to push forward using automation? The same thing can be done for remediation when you have a problem. So as we look forward 5 years, we have a collision course between testing and monitoring. We also then have a connection between monitoring and automation that's going to take us into more of the autonomous kind of a thing. A self-driving data center is the terminology that you might hear sometimes. And there will be cases where you still want human interaction, but for the unsexy things that happen over and over again, you might as well turn those over and let them be done better by a machine that's going to not get mad at having to do that 10 times in the day, and is going to create a higher quality experience. That will then lift this employee base to be able to work on things that are higher value.
Yeah.
And so what you're going to see happening inside of IT operations is not so much a reduction in staff, I don't think. I think you're going to see folks getting retasked into things that provide more direct value to the business rather than just keeping the lights on.
That's been the whole purpose of automation since we discovered automation, is to let humans be, do high value things. So my second last question is, what's the best piece of advice that you've ever received to help you get where you are today?
Best advice. I think the best advice is considering careers. Sometimes as these trends come and go and vendors come and go, we come and go too. And anybody would have had this experience where your friends maybe all started going to a new technology, maybe they left and went to a new shop and so on. And sometimes those folks are running away from a problem. Sometimes they're running towards something. The best advice that I got is don't run away. Just because the situation that you're in might be less than optimal, don't take the first train that comes along to get you out of town. Find the thing that represents where you want to be, and stand your ground until you find a great opportunity to leap towards rather than just run away from. And that's served me so well.
I've heard that. You don't run from something, run to something.
Yeah.
And then you're in a much better position when you land there.
Absolutely.
So what's your final message to ITwire viewers and readers, and to your current and future customers and partners?
AIOps is a journey. I hope that you'll forgive us as a market of vendors with what sometimes seems like buzzword bingo, where there's a new word of the month that sometimes you feel like we're dragging you down a path that sounds like the same thing as it was in the past. For years now, we have been building and assembling foundational blocks that have been interesting by themselves. Things about automation, things about unified data stacks, things about better penetration into monitoring, and so on. Now we're at a crossroads where we get to start to put those together like Lego bricks to build machines that were never possible before. This is an exciting time. It's also a very transformational time. One where you might feel like the hype is ahead of the capability, but I encourage you to not turn away from the whole thing, because the message is real. The idea of machine learning, of artificial intelligence being applied to operations helps us take this problem of data density and now do something with it so that we don't rely on the Brents. To take the example from the Phoenix project, the experts that represent bottlenecks, we don't have to hire the smartest, bestest guy in order to compete with everybody else, because we're going to have a common base that allows us to find and fix problems because evidence is presented in a way that we can all understand. Don't get caught up in using terms that no one else can understand. If you can't explain those terms to others, then don't use them yourself. And explain them in a way that your friends, your family, your spouse, that somebody who's outside of this crazy business would be able to understand. And if you use the terms that way, and if you force the vendors to use them that way as well, then we'll have a better combined understanding of where we're going, where we're not hiding behind terms that maybe people understand in a different way. And we're going to call each other, I think, to the carpet, I would say, at home. I don't know if that works here, but we're gonna try and have an honest conversation that gets away from some of the marketing speak.
Communication is always so important. And look, Chris Kline, VP of DevOps Strategy at CA Technologies, thank you very much for a great interview.
Thanks, Alex.